Have you ever had someone completely change the way you see the world? Someone you never expected to teach you anything at all? That happened to me one cold evening when I met a homeless man on a quiet city street. What he shared wasn't just wisdom, it was a lesson I'll carry for the rest of my life. This story isn't about him or me, it's about the kind of insight that reminds us what really matters in life. Stick around, because what I learned might just change the way you see your own life. It was years ago, during a particularly difficult time in my life. I'd been overwhelmed by work, relationships, and the endless chase for what I thought was success. Everything felt like a struggle, and I couldn't seem to find my footing. That evening, I was walking home after a long day. The streets were quiet, the air sharp with the chill of winter. I passed by a man sitting on the sidewalk, wrapped in a tattered coat, holding a small cardboard sign. Normally, I would have walked past, but something made me stop that night. He looked up at me, his eyes tired but kind, and smiled. "Evening," he said. His voice was warm, despite the cold that surrounded us. I hesitated, unsure what to say, but eventually I replied, "Evening. Are you doing okay?" He chuckled softly. "I've had better days, but I'm still here. And as long as I'm here, I can't complain too much." There was something about his tone that struck me. It wasn't bitterness or self-pity. It was acceptance, even a touch of peace. I found myself sitting down next to him, curious about how he could maintain such an attitude despite his circumstances. We started talking. He told me his name was Joe and that he'd been living on the streets for several years. Life hadn't been easy for him. He'd lost his job, his home, and much of his support system. But what stood out to me was how he spoke about his life. "I used to have it all," he said. "A good job, a house, even a nice car. But you know what I realized when I lost it? None of that stuff really mattered. What matters is how you live, not what you own." He paused and added, "People think being happy comes from having more, but it's the opposite. When you strip away all the noise, you start to see what's real. And what's real is simple: kindness, connection, and finding peace within yourself." His words hit me like a lightning bolt. Here I was, stressed about deadlines and achievements, while this man, who had so little by society's standards, seemed to have found a sense of clarity that I'd been searching for. Joe went on, "You know, people walk past me every day, rushing around, looking stressed out. They've got homes, jobs, all the things I don't have, but they don't seem happy. It's funny, isn't it? They've got everything, but they're still chasing something more." I asked him how he found peace despite everything he'd been through. He smiled and said, "Gratitude. I wake up every day and think, I'm alive, I'm breathing, the sun is shining. That's enough for me." Then he asked me a question I'll never forget. "What's enough for you?" I didn't know how to answer. I'd spent so much of my life chasing more success, more possessions, more recognition, that I had never stopped to think about what would actually make me feel fulfilled. Joe continued, "Most people don't ask themselves that. They think if they just get the next promotion, the next house, the next big thing, they'll finally feel happy. But happiness isn't out there, it's in here." He tapped his chest and smiled. That conversation stayed with me long after I walked away from Joe that night. He didn't just remind me to be grateful, he reminded me to redefine what enough means in my life. The Stoics often spoke about this. Seneca once wrote, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more, who is poor." Joe's wisdom echoed that sentiment. I realized that I had been measuring my life by the wrong standards, by what I owned, not by how I lived. That night, Joe taught me that wisdom doesn't come from wealth, status, or success. It comes from perspective. He reminded me that gratitude and simplicity are the foundations of a meaningful life. So let me ask you the same question he asked me. What's enough for you? And if you don't know the answer, maybe it's time to stop chasing and start reflecting. Have you ever had a conversation with a stranger that left a lasting impact on your life? Share your story in the comments. I'd love to hear it. If this story resonated with you, give it a like and share it with someone who might need a reminder about the power of gratitude. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel, John the Stoic, for more stories and lessons grounded in wisdom and life experience. Let's keep learning, reflecting, and growing together.